Okay, so let's have a look at another aspect of the law of attraction and the science behind it. And this time we're going to look at the power of your attention on the quantum field. So I'm just going to share with you an excerpt from Dr. Deepak Chopra's book, Creating Affluence. So Dr. Deepak Chopra tells us that physicists tell us that as we go beyond the realm of subatomic particles into the cloud of subatomic particles which make up the atom, which makes up everything in reality, that when we try to examine and understand these particles, which have fancy names like quarks and bosons and leptons and so on, these particles are so small that we can never measure them. There are no instruments that are available or will ever be available that will measure the minute smallness of these particles. In fact, they are so small that we can only think about them. Now, there is another very interesting fact about these particles. They have never been seen. So if you can't observe these subatomic particles, if you can't see them, how do we even know that they exist? And the answer is, we know that they exist by the evidence of the trails they leave behind in particle accelerators. In places where they're doing research on subatomic theory, one can see and even photograph the trails that these particles leave behind. And by looking at the trails, one knows that they did in fact exist. But there is another very interesting facet to these particles, and that is that they come into existence only when we observe them. So if we are looking at a quantum field, every time we look at it, these particles blink into existence. And every time we turn our attention away from them, they disappear into a void. They blink on and off like little lights in a dark room. The dark room you can imagine as infinite, unbounded space, and the particles that blink into existence do so by the mere act of putting attention on the field. When you put your attention on the field, then they come into existence. When you're not putting your attention on the field, then they are just a probability amplitude in the field of all possibilities. Each particle is a wave at the same time. A wave means it's spread out over space and time. And it's a wave until the moment of observation. A wave is not restricted to any one location in space or time. A wave is a diffuse thing. That's why it's called a probability amplitude in the field of all possibilities. It defines the statistical likelihood of finding a particle at a certain place at the time of observation, which means the time of attention. It is attention that transforms the probability amplitude, or the wave, for a possible measurement as a function of time. Attention takes that probability amplitude and brings it into material existence just by the mere act of observation. And the mere act of observation is, of course, putting our attention on it, or the field. So a particle is literally created by you and me through the act of observation. Just see how magical this is. It is the quality of our attention that is bringing a certain probability amplitude in the field of infinite possibilities into material existence. So if you understand what Deepak Chopra has just said, it means the mere act of our attention on a certain possibility brings that possibility out of the field of all possibilities into material form. This is an excellent example of how we can manifest what it is we desire. However, we've got to be aware that there's more to this than just simply putting out an intent, as we can see in the diagram in front of us now, that our conscious mind puts out an intent, and providing there are no contrary beliefs or programs sitting in the subconscious mind, will manifest our desired relationship, our successful, profitable businesses, our ideal homes, and so on. So the thing we've got to remember is we need to use our conscious mind as the gatekeeper or watchman for all the thoughts you entertain each day. We've got to be very careful of the subtle negativities that we put out in the way of attention to the quantum field. Every time we say, I can't afford that, we're telling the quantum field that we don't believe that we can have that. So instead of saying, I can't afford that, perhaps we could just simply ask a powerful question. If you don't have the money right at hand at the time, just ask the question, just put the question out to the field or superconscious mind. With what I have now, how can I create the money to have this thing? And just let that thought go out there, and you'll be surprised at how soon you'll get a creative answer to that question. Even agreeing with others in a casual conversation about how bad things are is letting the quantum field know that you believe in something contrary to what you might have been saying you wanted to exist. So you really need to discipline your conscious mind as to what it will allow through to the quantum field. Be very, very careful what you say, what you think, and be mindful. Just practice mindfulness every day. And when you catch yourself out thinking something negative, immediately change that to something more empowering and supportive of your goal.